Բարև ձեզ հարգելի բարեկամներ, Սփյուռքի ձայնը հեռուստահանդեսը դարձյալ ձեզ հետ է։ Թուրք պատմաբան Ugur Umit Ungori աշխատությունների մեջ մեծ տեղ է գրավում մինչև հայոց ցեղասպանությունը, հայկական մեծ գործարանների, անձնական խոշոր բիզնեսների, ինչպես նաև նրանց թողած ժառանգության բռնազավթումը եւ պատմական իրողությունների խեղաթյուրումը։ Մենք առիթ ենք ունեցել հանդիպելու այս թուրք պատմաբանի հետ, երբ նա գտնվում էր Նյու Ջերսիում, եւ այժմ սիրով ուզում եմ ձեր ուշադրությանը ներկայացնել մեր արած հարցազրույցը նրա հետ։
St. Thomas Armenian Church Cultural Committee presented a lecture by genocide scholar and PhD Ugur Umit Ungor, titled The Armenian Genocide and Modern Turkey Between State and Society. After the welcoming remarks and an introduction by the committee chairwoman Talar Safarian, Mr. Ungor presented the audience with a fascinating and informative lecture in which he detailed 1915 deportation, property confiscation, and subsequent systematic extermination of Armenians by Turkish authorities. Mr. Ugur Umit Ungor received his PhD from University of Amsterdam in 2009. He has published widely in a field of mass violence and genocide, in particular the Armenian genocide and Rwandan genocide. Thank you so much for this interview. Thank you for this wonderful presentation that we are about to witness. I have several questions for you, but before we get to them, I want to speak a little bit about you. How did you get into this subject of mass crime, mass violence? Particularly where and how did you hear about Armenian genocide? How did that subject attracted you, and how did you get into it?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, that's a very good question. I first came into the study of genocide, mass violence, and the Armenian genocide by studying the Holocaust, because I read this very interesting book by a Holocaust historian named Yehuda Bauer, who wrote one of the most important books on the Holocaust, Rethinking the Holocaust, in which he has a chapter, in chapter 3, I believe it was, in which he compares the Holocaust with other genocides. And one of these comparative approaches was the Armenian genocide. And of course I was reading this as a 20-year-old Turkish undergraduate student in the Netherlands, and I thought, the Armenian genocide? What's that? So this, this shock of never having heard about the Armenian genocide in Turkey, as a citizen of Turkey living in the Netherlands, I think this was so, my disbelief and also my revelation was such that I started committing myself to a study of the Armenian genocide. And studying the Armenian genocide in itself was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the more I read about it, the more I wanted to know about it. Ultimately, it took me about 10, 12 years before I came to this point. And the interest or the fascination always stayed with me. It never really dissipated.
Your lecture today, to large degree, is Armenian genocide and Turkey today, and modern Turkey. And I want to tie this to some of the points that you brought. You, as a 20 years old Turkish man who suddenly heard about it and it touched you in a profound way, what is the state of the knowledge of the Armenian genocide among the young Turks today?
Almost zero, I would say. And one of the arguments that I'm going to try to make is that the comprehensive denial policy of the Turkish government has meant that many Turkish children, teenagers, so kids in primary school and high schools, they don't know much about the genocide because the Ministry of Education has very clear directives and has very clear policy and pursuits in denying the genocide. So it's not terribly surprising that there's no knowledge whatsoever among large sectors of Turkish society of the genocide on the official level. Now, one of the other arguments I'm going to try to make is that that may be so for the formal education in the classroom, yes, but outside the classroom, in stories told in families, in extensive families, on the countryside in eastern Turkey, where formerly Armenians lived, the children who talk to their grandparents, for example, they get informally. There's a lot of knowledge, circumstantial, there it's a bit fragmented sometimes. It is, sometimes it's a mix of truths and half-truths, but it's there. I mean, there's a deep suspicion in a very wide spectrum in Turkish society that the the lies we're being fed in school might not be true. So, and it's this tension between the formal education, which denies it, and society, which has an inclination to acknowledge it or to be aware of it at least. That is a fascination that I continue to have, and that's something also that deserves more research.
You know what really fascinates me, and as you said, there is a split between the government version and between what people feel. It's a very serious subject to be presented to an individual who perhaps never heard of it or have never been introduced to. And it by default creates a lot of emotions, a lot of questions, a lot of doubts. Firstly, why do you think a government, Turkish government today, continues to deny the very existence of genocide?
Well, there are at least 5 or 6 reasons for the Turkish government of today, but also of the past decades, to deny the genocide. When we speak of the Turkish government, of course, there are elections, then there's a new government, there's a new regime, new political parties are in power. It changes. It might be a left-wing government. The next 5 years might be a right-wing government. Since 2000, 2001, we've seen a completely different government in Turkey in the decades before. But what's been consistent across all of these governments, across the political spectrum, is this denial policy. So why? I think the reasons are quite obvious. The first reason is political. I mean, what does the Turkish government stand to gain from acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide politically? Nothing much, I think. Secondly, economic.
The opposite, in fact.
The opposite, in fact. They might lose prestige. They might lose very net loss of power, actually, in the country. It might weaken their position. Secondly, economic, of course. What will happen if this Pandora's box of Armenian compensation and restitution of Armenian property would materialize? It's a Pandora's box and a nightmare waiting to happen for the Turkish government, of course, because this is something that could run into the billions and trillions and onwards from there. The third point is, of course, sociological. The Turks have convinced themselves that they have not committed this genocide. Now, if you uphold this lie for 99 years, how easy will it be from one day to the other to acknowledge the fact that not only that there was a genocide, but in the past 100 years, guys, by the way, sorry, we've been lying to you. I mean, it's a 180-degree somersault that a society is that is very difficult to make for a society. On top of that, we have all kinds of like psychological issues about people losing their identity because all of a sudden this grand narrative of the Turkish First World War, the Liberation War after that, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk coming into power in this in this spectacular way. None of that actually is the full truth. So it would mean that we would have to restructure fundamentally what it means to be Turkish. And that is, so the fear of losing identity, or changing their identity, is too painful for too many people. It's much easier psychologically to cling on to this idea that everything that we were taught so far is absolutely fine, and it's not a problem. And the final issue would be, it's in the private, I would say at the private level. Let's say that you're a Turkish academic working at a university, and you've read a couple of really good books about the Armenian genocide, and you want to acknowledge it and write about it. Now, as soon as you do that, what will happen to you? You'll be fired. So even people who have direct implications and direct repercussions, negative repercussions for people who stand out. So this peer pressure, apart from the top-down authoritarian pressure within universities, state universities in Turkey, also prevents people from, even if they informally acknowledge, you sit with them in a cafe, you have a cup of tea, they will say, yeah, I know it was a genocide. But they cannot openly speak out about it, which means that the changes cannot come from bottom up. They have to come from the very top of the government.
To continue your thought about repercussions to people, to individuals, that they can sit in a cafe and sort of quietly say, yeah, yes, it happened, we know what happened. This brings me to my next question, because there was, of course, a famous and very tragic assassination of Hrant Dink, an Armenian journalist who, in fact, did go against the conventional knowledge and had the courage to stand up and had the courage to say out loud that we have an issue and this issue is not going away. And these issues continue to be there for us as an identity, as a national identity, and of course he was assassinated. And what happened afterwards was truly remarkable, because regular citizens of Turkey stood up and said, "We all Armenians," which was in itself an indication that there is a seed of reconciliation in people. And perhaps if that seed is planted and nurtured, that can happen. What are your thoughts about this?
This is an excellent point you made. It is simply too easy to argue that, the Turks are pre-programmed to be denialists or the haters of Armenians. I mean, the demonstrations after the assassination of Hrant Dink clearly demonstrated that there is an initiative or a certain willingness among broad sectors of Turkish society across the political spectrum, again, I think, more in some than in others, to reconcile with the armies, or at least to acknowledge the fact that this kind of hate crime, ethnic violence is frowned upon nowadays in Turkey. So I think if you would hold an honest referendum in Turkey, with more than 70 million inhabitants, let's say 50 million people would vote in this referendum. A, should the border with Armenia open without any preconditions? Overwhelming majority would say yes. B, should the victimization of Armenians in the First World War be acknowledged, and should there be a memorial for that? I think a majority of that, majority of the constituents would say yes to it. So I don't think that there's a widespread kind of hatred among people, especially if they would get to know Armenians a bit better and realize how close we are actually culturally related. So forget about the same food we eat or the same music we listen to.
Or how we look.
Or how we look, and that Armenians can't tell Turks apart and Turks can't tell Armenians apart. This is a perfect example of what the sociologists call intimate enemies. So we're terribly close to each other. Something terrible happened in about a century ago, but the problem... Confined within itself, but the problem is reconcilable. So I'm relatively optimistic about that. But what is the crucial issue will be whether we can convince the younger generations who have to deal with this issue in the future, younger generations being university students, high school student kids, if we can convince them of the reality of the Armenian genocide, the historicity of it, then I think we've won this battle.
Let's speak about the reality, because reality has two parts. There is a Turkish government, and there's a broader spectrum of political spectrum, particularly United States, a major power and ally to Turkey. So these are two holdouts that do not recognize the existence of genocide. However, we are approaching rather grim reality of 100th anniversary of Armenian genocide. This is a major milestone. A lot is going to happen worldwide. Of course, Armenians are going to protest worldwide. Do you think that something like that will at least be a trigger to a more serious conversation between Turkey, between Armenia, between the United States, to recognize it on a government, on official level, so that can translate to younger generation and to schools and so forth?
I think this magical number of 100 years or a century after the genocide in itself it will not generate discussion or recognition. I think that we will be sitting in these chairs in about 2 years or 3 years, 102 years after the genocide or 101 year after the genocide, and we'll be having the same conversation, because it's not numbers that define reconciliation or acknowledgement. It's major political shifts. What we need is major political shifts in political thinking, shifts in ideology, and once that happens, then most probably there might be acknowledgement. As long as that is not the case, then I don't think the 100 number magically is going to dissipate denial or hatred between these groups. I'm a bit less optimistic about that. I mean, I do think that the channels, non-governmental channels for dialogue, people to people, recognition and dialogue have been relatively successful. There are NGOs in Armenia, there are NGOs in Turkey, they talk to each other, people visit each other. There is a plethora of scholars and students in Turkey, especially in Istanbul, but not exclusively in Istanbul, who are very receptive to the Armenian genocide. The Armenian genocide right now is being taught at Turkish universities. We should not forget this. Now, not all universities, only kind of the private universities, good universities. But I think we should continue with these debates, because the only hope I think we have is people to people at this point, because government to government is not going too well.
And what is your hope?
What is my hope? I think it would be really good if we could come up with a project to document and to videotape elderly Turks and Kurds in Turkey, so 70 years and up, whose parents have witnessed the genocide, and get them to speak up about these memories. Memories that also these people have carried with them as a burden. If we can get a database of, let's say, 1,000 very good interviews with these people,
Solid voice.
a solid voice that would counter Turkish governmental denial, because so far the Turkish government could say, yeah, these old Armenians, you know, these Armenian seniors, are they what they're telling, is that really true? You know, these are lies told by these people. But what if that is your own population that remembers the genocide, and not just the victims? I think it would be a fascinating way to outmaneuver denial and to generate this people-to-people discussion. And my hope is that we can organize a project like that, and by 2015 generate a website, for example, with let's say 1,000 or 600, 500 interviews that very effectively would be a voice of Turkish remembrance of the genocide.
You mentioned the fact that with recognition of genocide, particularly Turkish government and many others are worried that there will be other repercussions, particularly demand for land, demand for property, and so on. Do you think there should be that demand, number one? And number two, do you think it's an enough reason for the Turkish government to be shy of the subject just because they worry about the material loss or material consequences?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the map.
And land, for that matter.
Yeah, well, exactly. Look, I mean, if you look at a map and you juxtapose Turkey next to Armenia, and it's entirely clear to me that, you know, Turkey is vastly superior in terms of economic, political, military power, geopolitical, strategic, etc. What is it that they fear from this tiny stretch of land with a decreasing population, and a population of 2.8 million, 3 million? You know, so I don't really understand this fear. I think it's unrealistic. You know, who's gonna come twist Turkey's arm and demand land, especially on a large scale? Those are the unrealistic fears of some Turks. And then there are also unrealistic demands of some Armenians, such as, you know, the Sevr Treaty. We need to renegotiate the Sevr Treaty, and all of Eastern Anatolia needs to be ceded to Armenia. I mean, what will you do with the 20 million Turkish citizens that are living in these territories right now? So both of these utopias are unrealistic.
And non-productive.
Unproductive. But what is entirely productive and useful would be that the border opens up, not today, yesterday. So that there can be trade, and trade will solidify the ties between these countries. If there's anything we have learned from the European Union, from countries like France and Germany, who have hated each other for quite a long time, decades, if not century, and fought each other for 3 different wars, extremely destructive way. What helps is economic ties, intimate economic ties, because it would mean that if you harm the other country, you're also harming your own economy. And it is not unrealistic that the Turks from the border region, from Kars, the Chamber of Commerce, how many times have they petitioned the Turkish government, please open this border, because we are suffering here and we're not the only ones. So opening up the border, definitely number one. But also, look, there's been a genocide. That's not nothing. We need some reparations and some restitution. An apology would be nice. And starting with more symbolic openings, such as an apology, a sincere apology, not a very generic apology. Remember the German Chancellor, Willy Brandt, when he visited Poland for the first time, he went to the Warsaw Ghetto Wall, and he got on his knees in an apology.
Case specific.
Very, very case specific. And you can say, well, wouldn't it be great if the Turkish president, Abdullah Gül, visits Cizernakapert, and he gets on his knees and he lays some flowers there.
1.5 million
for 1.5 million souls. I mean, I think he would win the Nobel Prize with, you know, the Nobel Prize for Peace if that would happen. So it is the
huge regional transformation.
The regional transformation that these people have at their fingertips is absolutely amazing. And I think starting with these symbolic ways, and then we can move on to material claims, which are entirely realistic. I have met Armenians who have said, I just want recognition. I don't want a penny from Turkey. But I've also met Armenians who said, I want every single tree, every single sheep and cow and house and donkey that was confiscated from my grandparents back with interest. So the opinions, let's talk. So the opinions are also diverse in both communities. And I think what's important is that the very real existing poverty in Armenia, for example, can be mitigated through this restitution, reparations. I mean, if the Turkish government would set up a fund and they would renovate Armenians, Armenians' railways, for example, or the highways, or the public infrastructure. And so, you know, what's wrong about that? I don't see any problem there.
You know, we can talk for a very long time, for hours, and I know people are waiting for you. But I don't want to conclude this interview without making a very important point. It requires tremendous amount of courage for you to sit here in an Armenian church and speak to me in such an open, friendly, informative fashion. I do appreciate it, and I do recognize it. How are you seen by your peers, by your compatriots?
My Turkish compatriots, you mean? Okay, yeah, because I was just, you know, my Dutch compatriots, they look at me differently. Yeah. In Turkey, the opinions on people like me, there are many others who are much more courageous because they work in Turkey. That requires a completely different level of commitment and dedication. These people are met with a mix of admiration and, I would say, virulent hatred. On the one hand, right-wing Turkey does not want to hear anything about Armenian victimization, and of course they are negative. Their position is rather negative towards research that I'm doing, or towards the outspoken way that I carry out my work, but also many others in Turkey. Again, in Turkey is extremely brave to do these things. It's easy talking from the Netherlands. In a way, our cultures are also somewhat of obstacles for recognition of this genocide. But there's a mix, and I'm hopeful that young generations now will acknowledge the genocide, and that they will grow up to run the country in a much more productive fashion than before.
Thank you very much for this conversation. It is indeed true that we can talk for hours. But I just want to give sort of my own, a quick thought that crossed my mind, that a Turkish and an Armenian man can sit in front of each other and can have a conversation about a very difficult subject. And very quickly, both can feel that there are many ways that we can agree, that many ways we can reconciliate our differences, and there are many ways we can come to a conclusion. We are, of course, just shortly away from April 24th, which is a Armenian genocide anniversary, yet another one. Hopefully there will be time when these two nations can come together and understand and mourn together.
I agree with that. I think the only way to move forward for the Armenians and the Turks is to talk to each other. I'm not the first one to say that. Hrant Dink had already said this so many times. And I think through mutual discussions, continued mutual open discussions, like this individual discussion, but then on a much broader scale, is, I think, the only way to move forward. And my hope is that that will be our future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for talking to me.